Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this session here of Bang the Book Radio. We're going to chat about UFC 237 with Christian Pina of the Sports Gambling Podcast. His preview for this event available over at bangthebook.com. Make sure that you check that out. Speaking of checking things out, if you missed Thursday's edition of the Bettor's Box, my MLB betting podcast, you can find that on our bangthebook.com page on YouTube, where we've got a video with the audio there. And then, of course, you can find us on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever it is you stream your podcast content. We've got great stuff for the NBA and the NHL playoffs over at bangthebook.com right now. Also looking at NASCAR for this weekend, baseball on a daily basis. Preakness coming up next week. We'll do a podcast with Brian Blessing for that, as well as the PGA Championship. So plenty of things going on here at bangthebook.com and on Bang the Book Radio. All right, so we bring in Christian Pina from the Sports Gambling Podcast. He'll chat with us about UFC 237 down in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Christian, how's it going today, man?
I am good, man. This is a very interesting card. I don't know if there's a ton of stoppage power, and Brazilian fighters love the point fight and go to decision to their Brazilian judges. So it'll be very interesting, but all good on my end. How are you, my friend?
Doing very well, bud. Appreciate your time as always, and I'm glad that you survived your 30th birthday. I know you and I have talked a little bit about some different things that you were doing and some of the stuff you did, so it looks like you had a great birthday, and happy belated birthday to you, man. And let's start by talking about, you mentioned the judges in Brazil. This is a concept that we talked about last week with the judges in Canada. How did things work out in that regard last week?
Yeah, I mean, we saw it. Look, I was kind of all over a couple different Canadians there. Elias did not. I mean, the over in Elias fights maybe should have probably been something I paid much more attention to. But he didn't get there. It was a unanimous decision. He didn't deserve to be there. The same thing can be said for Brad Katona. I thought Divalisi certainly did win that fight, and I was really into Barrialt against Sanchez. Nothing there as well as we go down the line. I mean, the only Canadian fighters that wasn't Canada versus Canada that won there were Nordine Taleb, who was dominant in every fashion that I really kind of talked about and thought that he would be there. Morales won over Zahabi. It's one of those things. Canada did not have a good night on the judges' scorecard or in general. So maybe that's a changing of the guard. I thought that they were mostly so clear that it would be a top 5 robbery in each different one if every single one had gone Canadian. But hey, maybe that's a change in the sport, different judging styles, different judges as the sport grows and people come and go. So, maybe it's a little bit of a beacon of hope for the changes in the right way, but we will see in Brazil. Canada has had a lot less events, so we have certainly a larger sample size of Brazil, and it has not all been good. So, buyer beware a little bit here again.
So with that in mind, I mean, based on the results from last week, as you said, it seems like the Canadian fighters that did lose by decision deserved to lose. They were not the better combatants in those fights. So does that change anything for you the next time we roll back around to Canada? Are you going to look at it maybe a little bit more impartially, or are you going to expect that maybe things kind of come back to where they were if it's a toss-up sort of fight?
I really do think that it would have been, there's some stuff, there wasn't a fight that I thought, oh man, I wonder who won this. I think that everything was so clear that there wasn't really an opportunity for hometown swaying. And there were some finishes that they have no control over, of course, mixed in there as well. But yeah, I think it's certainly something to keep in mind. Again, I'm not sitting here to always pick the hometown people just because if it goes to the judges. It's just one aspect I feel you don't have to worry about if you bet on the other side. So it just eliminates one side. If you do go to that side, it's one thing, if you slightly favor a fighter, if it does go to the judges, I would more times than not reasonably think that they would get the hometown nod if it's anything close. But when stuff's that kind of cut and dry, I don't really take it out of context, and we'll see with Brazil, and maybe this is kind of a sweeping change across the sport. That would be good to see. But it just eliminates that, when you have, let's talk about Namajunas versus Andrade just philosophically here. If you bet on Andrade, if it does go to, that you're going to get a fair shake, at least, let's call it that, from judges in Brazil, if not more than that. You can't say the same for Namajunas, so it's just something you have to take into account in your handicapping, regardless of prior outcomes.
Now, here's something I'm kind of curious about. As you mentioned, there have been a lot of fight cards in Brazil, and obviously their judges very, very experienced with all the different promotions that fight down there. Does it depend on the city? Are all the same regions in the same areas, going to have these questionable judging situations? Or is it, this one's in Rio de Janeiro, for example, huge city, obviously, to some degree, sort of an epicenter of MMA. Does that dictate how some of these fights may be decided?
No, I mean, Rio has really been kind of the main hub, and it's the one that they go to, virtually every single time. Not every single time. Fortaleza is another one in there, but it's, again, much like Rio, it's another big city. So it's not as if, it was a little bit of a unique thing when they were in St. Petersburg a couple of weeks ago versus, how judges would see things in Florida or Miami or whatever the case may be. So they're largely, they're not going to, villages in Brazil. These are largely cities that have been growing up with this sport in one way or another. So it's not really something I take into account, whether it would be in Fortaleza or Rio de Janeiro, whatever the case may be.
All right, so we look at that main event here. This is a championship fight in the strawweight division. Namajunas and Andrade. Andrade is the small favorite here, minus 120, minus 125 range, but she's not the champion. So does that surprise you that she's favored?
Yeah, it's very interesting. We've seen this time and time again that underdog champions, when they come into their fight as an underdog, traditionally do very, very well. Namajunas here is finally making her, come back to the octagon after more than a year off, and she is doing so in the most hostile of territories possible against Jessica Andrade. This is a really interesting fight to me. Again, the layoff with Namajunas, you don't know, beating Jędrzejczyk, shocking the world before that. She's been on the come up, and despite everything that I kind of thought I knew about her and thought of her, she has proved me wrong. And, there is something to be said for heart. She's won 8 fights professionally with 3 title fights. So there's been a lot thrown at her, and maybe I, kind of underestimated her a little bit just because I truthfully didn't see anything special out of her when she was starting to come in. And stylistically, this is a really interesting fight. Despite Namajunas' kind of lack of experience, she and her coaching staff have some of the best fight IQ and game plans for fights I have ever seen. That's the one thing I have noticed throughout watching her during this come up. She is the smartest person in that cage at all times, and that is how she has been able to have this success. Now, person versus person, female versus female, this is going to be one of her most tricky. She cannot match the power of Andrade. Now, granted, few can, especially at the strawweight division at 115 pounds here. But you're talking about a strawweight with 6 knockouts, 7 submissions, and a 19-6 record. That is, something that doesn't come across every so often when you see 19 wins, yet 13 of them are via stoppage for a strawweight. That is incredible finishing power. And so if Namajunas has really been able to use her savvy, stick and move, and not give in to what fighters, her opponents want to do. For Andrade, she's going to want to keep that forward pressure, be relentless, and not let Namajunas breathe. This is going to be a huge cardio battle between the two of them, especially late into the championship rounds. And, one thing about anyone that Rose has fought, mostly Jędrzejczyk, not really, doesn't have this finishing power. So it's going to be a unique test for her. She's going to have to stick and move and really, really frustrate Andrade and make her chase her, which is not her game. Namajunas is much more of a counterpuncher, head movement, has an unbelievable defense, and picks her openings just enough to out-volume. When you look at this, though, for Rose, 3.7 strikes landed per minute. You look over at Andrade at 6.6, couple that with over a 10% increase in accuracy, and she takes less than Rose. So it's going to be very interesting to see what her game plan is here. I do agree with this line being just about a pick with Andrade, maybe a 10-cent favorite. It's just stylistically, this is something I don't think that Rose has really ever seen, but she has had an answer for every type of opponent she has fought so far.
I think one thing that's really interesting about this fight is the location. As you mentioned, it's about as hostile as it gets for Namajunas. She's never fought outside of the U.S. at any point in her professional MMA career. And we've kind of talked about that a little bit in terms of fighters trying to get comfortable, in a place that they haven't been before. Obviously, Andrade has fought in Brazil, but this is a title fight in Brazil. She hasn't fought in her native country since February of 2015. There's a little bit of extra added pressure in there for her, too.
Of course. Look, Rose, just because of, I don't want to say how she looks because that is not fair at all, but you look at her and she gets the same kind of discredit for very different reasons than a girl like Paige Van Zandt, right? People will look at Paige and say she's there for her looks. I'm not commenting on Rose's looks to be the reason for that, but you look at her at 5'5", at 115 pounds, and you just don't look at her as this imposing champion. But on the other side, when you look at Andrade, that is what you see. She's much more built. She's much more physically gifted, but that's just the difference. Rose uses her head while Andrade, and most other fighters use their physical tools, and that's what separates the great ones from the good ones. And we've seen this time and time again when it comes to that type of matchup, that the mind will always prevail. But Rose is going to be in a bunch of firsts. It'll be, very interesting to see what she says kind of post-fight, regardless of the outcome, on which one was most difficult for her to handle. Look, she's a consummate professional despite being only 26. This is hometown hometown pop. This is hometown judging. This is, Rose making a title fight in the most hostile environment ever. And again, the travel, the weight cutting, all that type of stuff has to take place in a situation where she's not familiar. So it definitely needs to be thought about in your handicapping for sure. But she's kind of proven time and time again she's able to rise to the occasion.
What about the injury concerns for Namajunas here with the the vertebral fracture? Is that something that, obviously injuries can heal, but there's always that mental side of an injury, kind of worrying about, if it may come back up, if you start getting uncomfortable over the course of the fight. How much do you worry about that here with the champ?
Yeah, I really do. Look, it's the unknowns, and I've always talked to you about not betting on the unknowns. And there is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to Namajunas. The stuff that we just talked about is kind of the mental aspect that she's always been able to handle. She really had some problems with that early on in her career and got with a sports psychiatrist and really kind of figured those things out. And when you talk about the physical aspect, I think that physically, if she's been cleared and she feels good, that is one thing. And she has to be able to trust that and trust herself. If she, feels something she never felt before in that area, is there, a risk of DQ withdraw? Sure. It's just one more aspect. Look, there are much more unknowns about Namajunas coming into this fight than there are Andrade. We know what Andrade is, but Rose has, again, proven every single time that I've doubted her that she's more than capable to rise to the occasion. But it's just one more layer here, which is, I've tried to fade Rose along the way, and she has burnt me every single time. So I've kind of learned my lesson that maybe she is just that person right now. But there's way more questions on that side than there are on Andrade. So I would definitely lean towards that side.
Well, and I think that our listeners can hear the complexities of this fight. I think this is the most time we've spent on a main event for any of the UFC podcasts that we've done here. So, again, lots of different angles, lots of different things to look at for both sides here in this fight. Should be a good one there in the strawweight division. But we'll move on to this middleweight fight here. Cannonier and Silva. Silva, obviously, this fight certainly means a lot to him, as all of them do when he gets the opportunity to fight in Brazil. He's a plus 115 dog here in this one. Does this line feel pretty fair to you?
Yeah, look, this is, Anderson Silva is kind of giving back. He's giving back to his fans. Certainly not to the level of, a BJ Penn or some of these guys we've seen. I mean, he has shown the ability, despite what he is at this stage of his career, to at least survive, which is, when you take Adesanya that long, you survive against DC, you do all these type of things, you're going to earn even more respect, and he is certainly doing that here. Look, this is Brazil. I'm not shocked to see him on this card. Fans will always love to see him fight no matter what. And again, showing that he can kind of, at least survive it is half the battle here. We talked about Cannonier on the other side I believe maybe a month or two ago when we talked about, I believe, this fight with Zaleski, and it was kind of who's the better prospect here. I know he's 35. David Branch. Yeah. And so, what could kind of come up to that? Could he figure it out? And before that, he's had some battles. And, he's somebody that is, we look at his record 2-3 in his last 5. And you think, well, that's maybe he is who he is. But I just think that he's in something of the middleweight division is so good. He's trying to find his way. And he's, a lot younger in fight years. I'll say that. Look, this is going to be very interesting stylistically here because Cannonier is an explosive counterpuncher who sticks and moves, tries to find that one opening, and he is a knockout artist. The issue here for him is against a guy like Anderson Silva, who just proved his defense is still at the top of the division and possibly even the top of the UFC. It's going to be really hard for him to finish him here. I mean, finishing Anderson Silva and knocking him out in Brazil would be something, they may riot. And I'm not saying that it's anything to do to that, but it's just something that I don't think that Cannonier has, the ability to do that when you talk about the veteran know-how and the savvy of a guy like Silva. This is going to be, a fascinating contest. It really is. Cannonier, I keep saying he has heavy hands. He's powerful, but he can also be technical. I don't know that he can outvolume, some guys most of the time, but can he probably outvolume a guy like Silva at this stage? I mean, the stats say so, 3.6 to 3.1, but he's far less accurate because when he takes a break from going technical, he goes kind of all in. So it'll be very interesting to see what this one is. You know, Silva's a guy that I hate to say it, you really want to look to bet against first and try to build the case the other way. To me, the one thing that makes a ton of sense here is, you know, the over 2.5, maybe, you know, hopefully get a 1.5 would be great, or fight goes to decision. Either way, that way kind of takes the who will out volume who out of it. I just don't see Cannonier finishing Silva, and Silva being 1-7 in his last 8 fights. This is something I don't see Silva being able to finish Cannonier, just because I think he'll respect that length, respect that reach, everything like that he usually has the advantage on guys. But look, Cannonier has just the same exact reach advantage. So this one I really think will be a standing battle. They'll cancel each other out. Silva will do his kind of patented thing, stand in the octagon, shower with love either way, and be on his way one way or another.
So typically UFC contracts are usually for 3 fights, at least based on, you know, what I've seen in the past here. Adesanya, his first fight in almost 2 years. This would be the second one. I mean, is this it for Anderson Silva? You know, win or lose, is he going to go out, you know, with this final fight card in Rio de Janeiro, or is he going to have another fight, you know, potentially later this year?
Yeah, it makes some sense. If he wants to go out in front of his hometown fans, I think that win, lose, or draw, the reception would be one that, you know, many people in this world can only dream about, to be showered with that much admiration, love, and respect, right? So it certainly makes some sense. I mean, he's really, you know, said point blank at this point, I'm fighting for fans. I'm fighting to give back. I'm fighting to give back to the UFC and bring their product forward, because he is a draw. And so, you know, I'm sure that's potentially already worked out with him and Dana White. You know, when you look at all the factors, it certainly makes a lot of sense. I just don't know. You know, I think that contracts are something, when you get to this level, are largely something that can be altered. They're largely something, just because he doesn't have a contract doesn't mean he can't come back for one. You know, if it's, you know, whatever he wants, or whoever opponent he wants to fight in something of a legend versus legend, that could happen. So there's a ton of outside factors. I can't confidently say, you know, could it be possible? Yes, he'll probably likely never have a bigger reception if he does choose to do that. But he's been proven to be selfless every step of the way.
All right, so we go to the featherweight division here. Jose Aldo's a minus 140 favorite. Alex Volkanovski on the other side, plus 120 on the comeback. And, you know, this is an interesting line to me as something of a UFC outsider, because Aldo has the big-time name recognition. He's a guy that's been a title holder. He's a guy that, you know, has had, I mean, he's fought a who's who in this division for the last, you know, basically 6, 7, 8 years. But yeah, you kind of wonder here. I mean, does he deserve this minus 140 price tag?
I think being in Brazil, which he has benefited from many, many times when it goes to a decision, has something to do with it. And odds makers are becoming keen of this. Look, this is Volkanovski is on a 15-1-5 fight winning streak. He has knocked out Chad Mendes. He has done everything along the way that you want to see. Although, much like Rose Namajunas at this stage of her career, somebody you cannot count out. I have tried to do it, and these guys and girls just won't go away, and all the power to them. I'm happy to tip my cap at that. This is one that's very interesting. I would make this line, you know, maybe minus 115, plus 105, even money coming back on Aldo. Volkanovski is somebody that is, you know, you look at him and you look at the tape. He's just so good at mixing together everything that he does. It's really his kickboxing, wrestling, but he also pressures. It's relentless style, and it's given everybody, you know, kind of trouble. The issue is if he goes in there, I don't want to say takes Aldo lightly, because I don't think he would do that at all, but tries to not really make adjustments and not look at this as a unique fight where if you go in for a takedown against Jose Aldo, you better be ready for what's coming on punishment on the other end, because he's not really had to face the type of technical, veteran savvy that is Jose Aldo, especially in Brazil. Look, this is going to be an amazing fight. This one to me is really a tale of two guys going in different ways. I think Jose Aldo has said time and time again at this point, he's not really willing to dedicate every second, every minute of the day to, you know, getting a title shot, to doing that, to putting in that work at this point. And not to say he's undedicated at all, but when you look at this, you know, Volkanovski really has a path here. He can, if he wins this fight, he's likely to get a title opportunity either his next fight, I would certainly think. If not, I would say he probably gets Holloway, and the winner of that gets either the rematch or the title fight in that sense. So Volkanovski, the hungry guy, we've seen this before with the last David Branch fight, right? We talked about guys who just are there for a paycheck, and that's not Aldo at all. He'll never be there just for a check, but guys with two different trajectories, and one is much more hungry, having not been there, do that. And I'm not in the business of betting against 15 fight winning streaks. So definitely side with Volkanovski in this fight.
So would this be the fight of the night candidate for you then, and pretty clearly at that?
No, it depends on what you like. Would I say this is going to be the most action, the most likely outcome of a knockout? No, I would not say that this is, fight of the night candidate written all over it, just because that's not the style that usually wins that. I don't see it kind of being a war. It's going to be much more technical in my estimation. It's going to be much more grappling, kickboxing at range. I just don't really see the knockout finishing kind of, oh my God, I can't wait to see this type of possibility here. But if you're someone who likes technical wrestling, you like the takedowns, you like to see chain wrestling, then this is going to be your cup of tea for sure.
All right, so we spent a lot of time here on the three biggest fights on the card, at least from name recognition, the main event, the lead-in, and then the lead-in to that one. That's by design, because this is a pretty top-heavy card, as Christian and I discussed before we started recording here. So let's bounce around now with some things that you like, some matchups you think could surprise people. What are you looking at here as far as either betting opportunities or just good fights?
Yeah, let's go down and let's go to Betch Correia and Irene Aldana. Plus 240 is the comeback on Correia. And look, it really, Correia, I should say, it really, I don't want to say I don't get this line. I do get the line. I do get where it's at. I just would favor Betch Correia. And when you're getting an underdog, that's in a fight that's very likely to go to a decision in her hometown judging, it's kind of where I'm going to start. But I mean, look, when you look at a girl like Correia, title shot, after 3 consecutive wins, beaten back then by Ronda Rousey. Then again, who wasn't? And 1-2-1. Only Jessica Ai is her only win. So she's coming off a long layoff. Look, I get it here. This line is what it is for a reason, and I say that because I agree with it. That being said, Correia has definitely had some iffy decisions in her past, and guess where we are? That's Brazil. Aldana, she really, I want to say coasts, but she's almost notorious for winning a 10-8 round run and taking the next 2 off just to survive. And if that is what she does in this fight, there's a real opportunity for Betch Correia to steal a split decision victory here. So just from the value alone, she is definitely, in my opinion, has, kind of the crisper striking, definitely has the ability to kind of outvolume her, at least in the later rounds, even if Aldana, who is definitely the more well-rounded fighter here, takes that first run. I've not seen Aldana close and lets fights get a lot closer than they, should be there. So a big underdog there that I think is certainly worth a little bit of a sprinkle when we go down to there. Look, there's a lot of female fights on this card, and my affection for overs in female fights. So unless it's, girls that are, Macy Chiasson that are knocking everybody out, this is, maybe an opportunity for round robins, all that type of stuff. And one more I'll really talk about just because I think it's really kind of a polarizing type of fight. I mean, Warlley Alves, Sergio Moraes is, Warlley Alves is a guy that I really wanted to get behind for a very long time. That being said, he kind of never figured it out. He came on the scene absolutely on fire. But after, things happen in this sport. So he has, the kind of patented finishing maneuver with his patented guillotine that 4 of his 6 subs are by. And Moraes does not have the wrestling, in my estimation, to kind of wrestle with him and get him there. So this is something that is back and forth a little bit. Would I be shocked if Alves once again doesn't figure out his potential? No. Again, especially in Brazil, I know I'm kind of going back and forth here and betting against somebody in Brazil, but I just think when I look at this, if this may be the last opportunity to get Alves, before he figures it out and the market kind of catches up for him. So I think that he also doesn't have the strike up to stand with Warlley when you look at his body of work. If Alves or Moraes needs to give him the fight that he wants, but I think that he is the type of fighter that will. It's that close quarters fight in a phone booth. And I just don't think that Moraes can stand with him and outvolume him for 3. This one is another one that is either likely to be a submission. If it was a submission, it's going to be Alves via guillotine by my estimation, or Alves via a decision by just outvoluming him there.
Christian Pina, who's working and fine on the Sports Gambling Podcast, also his UFC 237 preview over at BangTheBook.com. Christian, as always, man, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
Enjoy the fights, my man. We'll talk soon.
There you go. There's Christian Pina of the Sports Gambling Podcast and also our UFC writer over at BangTheBook.com. Not sure if I'll be able to get to the Bettor's Box on Monday. If I don't, we'll be back again with that on Thursday. We'll be doing a Preakness and PGA Championship podcast with Brian Blessing next Wednesday, so be on the lookout for that. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you again next week.